Ukraine will start building new IFVs and main battle tank in a newly built factory in Ukraine, built by the German defense company Rheinmetall. And while that's great news, it's desperately needed as the front has started moving in the southeast, but not in Ukraine's favor. We'll talk about this and anything else that has happened in the past few days in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. In the city of Dnipro, a Russian Iskander attack almost hit the Mednikov hospital. It missed barely and thus damaged it, but it didn't fully hit it. The Russian mill blogger Diary of a Paratrooper was talking about it, that it hit areas near the hospital. It is possible that the target of the strike was the medical facility itself, since its individual buildings function as one of the main hospitals for Ukrainian servicemen. So while this is just a mill blogger speculating, he's speculating that maybe we wanted to strike the hospital because there are wounded soldiers in there. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but that doesn't sound too much in accordance with the Geneva Convention to me. If soldiers are in hospital, they should be hors de combat, and thus attacking a medical facility just because it treats soldiers doesn't seem to be that much in accordance to the law. The Russians have, in the past week, used 1,100 gliding bombs, 560 attack drones, and 20 missiles against Ukraine, as Zelensky reported. We switch to the developments along the front line and start with Kursk. Here we see the Ukrainians operating south of Olgovka. This is in an area where we have not seen them operate recently. We see the Ukrainians here in this forested area right south of Olgovka, which is on the map in this area here. So we see fresh Ukrainian presence here. They have been attacked in this in the video that is the basis for the geolocation, but it shows us that the Ukrainians are still operating outside of the areas that are assumed to be under Russian control. Further to the east, the Russians have also attacked Ukrainians at positions where they recently have been pushed back. We have the Ukrainians west of the town of Ruskaya Konopelka. Here, a fresh geolocation shows them right here at the road close to the town. So we have the Ukrainians back at this position, at least in a momentary basis, showing that the Ukrainians are still doing counterattacks in the Kursk region and are far from being defeated at this very moment. That's it, though, from the developments in Kursk. According to international reports, intelligence data, and the Ukrainians themselves, the North Koreans have arrived in Kursk, but so far I have not seen any reports that the Ukrainians have already engaged them, even though there are signs, pictures being handed around teaching the Ukrainians Korean in the military regard. So basically how to say give up, hands up, drop your weapons, things like this, to allow the Ukrainians to demand the surrender of North Korean troops. In the Kharkiv region, the Ukrainians are reporting that the Russians try to advance through the town of Liptsi here in this direction towards Kharkiv. But so far, the Ukrainians say they managed to hold them back, and the Russians do not advance in this direction. The Ukrainians are also saying 60% of the 122 and 152 millimeter shells for the Russian artillery used here in the Kharkiv region is coming from North Korea, and the quality of them is supposedly very much subpar. That would give this report obviously some relevance, that the artillery shells being used here are not of the same quality. On the Eastern Front, the Ukrainians are reporting an intensified usage of gliding bombs in the Kupiansk area. Here it is expected that the Russians will try to cross the Oskil River, which runs down here fairly soon. They are currently advancing along the Sherebets here in the east, and it's expected that they want to cross further to the west. The Russians have also reached the road here itself, the R79 in the town of Krylyakivka. Here they've reached it, and we have a geolocation of this, that Russian infantry was already operating in that forested area. So now the western part, Senkove, is cut off from the east, from the front line east of the Oskil, Oskil at this point. Further to the south, I have no change in territory until we reach the area south of the Seversky Donetsk. And while there's fighting reported in the direction of Seversk, I do not see any change in territory. Neither do I see any change here at Chasiv Yar in this direction. And I actually don't even have any change in Toretsk and in the New York area either. Though we do have developments in the general Pokrovsk area. Here, the Russians have operated west of Novorodivka, which we have here. We have a geolocation of this, that the Russians are now somewhat south of Lysivka. This is this tree line here. The Russians are now in this tree line, having advanced a little bit further to the west. Much more significant is the developments in the town of Selidove. Here we have the Russians raising the Russian flag in the center of Selidove on the administrative building. And as you can see, the pro-Ukrainian deep state map is already giving most of Selidove to the Russians. Only this part here is supposedly still contested, but according to the reports I have from Ukraine, the Ukrainians have already withdrawn, or the last rear guard is in the process of withdrawing. So we should expect Selidove to be fully in Russian hands with the next situation report. This was necessary simply by the Russians bypassing Selidove and threatening to cut it off. They achieved an exemplary turning maneuver in this regard, forcing the Ukrainians to give up their good positions inside of Selidove. An example for that is what we have here. We have the Ukrainians attacking the Russians inside the center of Vishneve, and as you can see, this was one of the lines of communication into Selidove, leaving only this road up here as a last connection to the rear areas, to the supply of the Ukrainians, forcing them to withdraw along this route here. South of it, we have the Russians advancing west of Tsukorine. Here we have a geolocation as well of them now being at this point northwest of Kremina Balka. This should be roughly in these areas here. We have the Russians down to this area, advancing further west from Tsukorine. The Russians have also by now taken Rink and are threatening Kruchivka from the north, from the south, and from the east. Here again, we should expect a timely Ukrainian withdrawal within the next few days. And as you can see, the contested areas here will likely be in Russian hands within the next 48 hours as well. Further south, the Russians have advanced in the town of Katerinivka. We have this here. It's contested for a while already. The Russians have recently been spotted in here and here in the northern areas. Now we have the Russians further west, reaching the western side of, or the line south of the western side of Katerinivka. The Russians are now here after having been in here and in here. So their advance here continues as well. While all of those were mostly minor gains, except for Rink and Rink, I think was the town. I think I always Hirnik, I always pronounce it wrong, I apologize. Hirnik, apart from Hirnik and from Selidove, the gains here were somewhat minor, but what is happening west of Katerinivka is quite significant in the context of this. First of all, the town of Bohoyavlenka has apparently fallen to the Russians already. This was the next town between Vodiane and Vuhledar. It's now in Russian hands. And as you can see, the Russians have also entered the towns of Novoukrainka. This one, it's unclear. I've already read reports that it's taken by the Russians yet. I cannot confirm this. And while we knew that the Russians were closing in on Shakhtarske, and while the map here is indicating that the Russians might have entered it, we now have a geolocation of this that, first of all, we still have the town of Boroyavlenka here, and here's the geolocation of Shakhtarske. They're already in the northern part, so they've crossed the town already, and the next one is showing them on the road to the east. That makes it very likely that Shakhtarske is already reached by the Russians, so the current front line is probably like this, somewhere like this. The Russians have already advanced further to the northeast from their latest positions. West of it, I do not see any change except for the loss of Levatne. The Ukrainians have admitted it by now. And they admitted it from their military spokesperson. And in the region of Zaporizhzhia, we have reports from the Ukrainians that the defensive lines are about to be completed. The second line is, according to the Ukrainians, 99% done, and the third one will be ready in a few weeks. So while we have the Ukrainians building additional fortifications here, and while they are confident in the quality of those fortifications, we obviously need to come back to the movement here. The Ukrainians are outnumbered both in material as well as in personnel in the southeastern and eastern directions, and here they had been reliant on fortifications that are now being breached by the Russians and that have now been overcome. Now it means that the Ukrainians have to withdraw in positions that apparently are of less quality than what they had before, and with the Russians now moving fairly fast, up to several kilometers per day, this carries within it the problem that the fortifications the Ukrainians have built in the rear areas further back than where the current front line is might soon be overrun before they are completed. So while this is far from a collapse of the front line or a complete breakdown of the Ukrainians, the situation here is problematic and will probably continue to deteriorate for some more time until the front line stabilizes again. We should not expect that this was the last of the Russian advances in the southeastern region. Probably this line should somewhat fairly soon be in Russian hands with the current developments, and it's far from clear that this will be everything where the Russians have advanced. Overall, though, we need to see we are talking about a small part of Ukraine. In general, the way it's going currently is not good. There is no sugarcoating this. There's no reason to start some fantasies that this is all a ploy or something, but in total we need to see this is a tiny fraction of Ukraine. Ukraine still has strategic depth. If something changes on the Ukrainian side, be it in recruitment, be it in Western aid, there's enough time for it. Ukraine can still trade territory for time, but something will have to move. There's no question about that. No question that that is still open in this regard. We have news from troop generation in the North Korean side as well. The North Koreans, by now, according to the South Koreans, have already delivered 8 million shells of the calibers of 122 and 152 millimeters. That's a massive amount. They also probably delivered 100 KN-23 ballistic missiles, and they delivered an unknown number of Bullseye 4 ATGM carriers. One of them has recently been spotted in, I think it was Belgorod, close to the front line there. It uses ATGMs that are beyond visual range, so it's a fairly modern and apparently fairly capable system that the North Koreans have handed over to the Russians, but the total number in this regard is unclear. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are still working with their innovation, and we now have a video actually showing us how they managed to intercept the reconnaissance drones. We've seen it in the past that the Ukrainians were using FPV drones at an altitude where FPV drones are not supposed and not likely to operate. Now we know why. Now we know how it works. We clearly see this is a propeller, and this seems to be one as well. So they carry. Here we see the movement of the propeller. We see that they basically use some kind of mothership drone to carry an FPV drone to the altitude for it then to intercept the Russian reconnaissance drone. This is the way they apparently managed to do this. This is how they have achieved their successes against the Russian reconnaissance drones. And we have news from international aid and political developments as well. First of all, we will talk about the Russian economy. We have military informant here, and he's sarcastically, we want to say everything's well with the Russian economy. The current interest has been raised to 21%. The Russian economy is completely overheating by now. There has been a recent article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, about the lack of workers, that workers, even in dairy farms, just milking the cows, are demanding a wage equal to an IT worker now. The wages are rising massively inside of Russia and creating an inflation and overheating the economy that will lead to a crash. The question is only, will that crash come fast enough, and will it come hard enough to stop Russia? But it needs to be clear that the Russian economy is in trouble, and it is in serious trouble. And this obviously, the heating of the economy, the rising prices for wages driven by the lack of workers due to the losses in Ukraine, due to people fleeing outside of Russia to not be drafted, due to the deportation of migrants after the attacks in Moscow. All of this is causing problems, and I made a video that I'll link here about the Russian personnel problems, where I mentioned this as well, in case you have missed it so far. Then we have news from Ukraine. Rheinmetall has opened the first factory inside of Ukraine. It will do repair work on military equipment, but it will also be used for the production of IFVs and MBTs, which MBTs is unclear as of now. The IFV that was told to be produced is the KF-41, the Lynx, the most modern IFV in the world, even though the number so far is fairly limited. Which MBT is unclear. In the past, it was said about the KF-51 Panther, but the issue there is that it should not be ready for production yet, so we'll have to see what is going on, what MBTs will be produced inside of this factory. Rheinmetall will also open a powder factory and an ammunition factory, and in total the numbers of factory Rheinmetall plans to build in Ukraine is 5. An additional factory is planned to build air defense systems, and the production of the Lynx, as said, is starting at the end of 2024. Canada has also sent some aid. They have sent 10 LAV 6.0. Those were promised a while ago. Canada has promised 50 in total, and the first 10 ones have now been delivered. But that was already it for today. If you like the situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave your comment what do you think about the current Ukrainian frontline problems in the southeast. How do you think the Ukrainians will be able to stabilize it? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. At this point, I want to thank Mark Jones for your nice words and for the donated books. Battlegrounds, Battle Group, The Lessons of the Unfought Battles of the Cold War. And I want to thank Kraut M for 3 zips of Jim dominating the battle space with Rhodesia's Elite Selous Scouts from Tim Bax. That was donated to me. And I want to thank you, the unknown donor for Warships After London. Thank you for this book as well. All of those were donated through my Amazon wishlist. In case you want to support the channel this way or another way, you find the means in the description. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. Thank you very much for your support, for your continued support, but that was it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.